Welcome back to Tartarian / Tibetan Tales number 73, The Magic Bird of Mount Everest. And I've been thinking a lot in the past while about Mount Everest in general, and it's known as the Turquoise Peak, and what the stories that go behind it and what it truly is, what's underneath it, what's inside it, how it originated. Is it part of an ancient massive tree? Is it part of something ridiculous, an old civilization, an old mountain, an old city, an old metropolis, an old star fort? I have no idea. But it's the tallest place on Earth, supposedly, that we know, in our realm at least. So it's got some interesting things about it. So I wanted to show you this book and read this part right here where it says, Choma Lungma is Mount Everest, the giant peak that has defied so many explorers. Tibetans say that the watchdogs of Chomo Lungma guard their Lady of the Turquoise Peak and warn her when strangers approach. They say that there are all kinds of evil spirits around Chomo Lungma, that so long as man is tainted with even a suspicion of sin, his sin will awaken to evil, the evil and the demon and spirits of the mountain. For none may approach but those who are as pure as the mountain's snows. If the watchdogs are faithful guardians of Chomo Lungma, the Tibetans have been no less faithful guardians of the stories that have grown up in the shadow of the mountain. So again, there's no telling exactly what the truth is, but I love hearing stories that are passed on through time and from the oldest generations to now. And that's what I think this book, The Magic Bird, might be in relation to. It's just a very interesting story that I think you all should check out. And I'll put the link in the description below in the info section. And I'm not going to read the actual story because that part is actually about 60 pages. It would be a little too long for now. I might sum it up in a later video, but the very intro is called The Gathering of These Tales in Tibet, and it tells about how this woman gathered the stories that you're going to hear, the magic bird, or that you'll read. And it's very cool because it's one thing, they're from a time when it was possible to gather some of these old stories from the oldest generation. A lot of that generation is pretty much gone, or all of it is pretty much gone. Maybe some stories have gotten passed by, but a lot has changed, and this woman was able to get some great stories out of Tibetan masters and people that were probably entered into a terrible just situation as a result of China. So a lot of these I think are gone, and this woman definitely preserved one, and it's got a little relation to Mount Everest and all this stuff. And so I wonder if there's some symbolism here that is referring to maybe the magic bird is a plane or some kind of device, or a griffin or a tartar, if anything. So who knows, but definitely take a look at that story. But this intro I'll read here because it's just, I find it fascinating how these tales were gathered, and I think you will too. And there's a lot that you can say about Tibet and the ancient people through this. So it's just a great book. So here we go. Well, I'll chime in again from time to time, but this is the first chapter where it says The Gathering of These Tales in Tibet. Perhaps one of the most fascinating stories of Tibet is that of Padmasambhava, the lotus-born saint who brought Buddhism to that country from Udayana in northern India. Legend tells that he traveled over the distant Himalayas and that evil spirits of storm and tempest did their utmost to check him on his journey by venting the full force of their wrath against him, causing snowfalls and hail and wind, loosening avalanches in his path, and doing their utmost to prevent him from reaching his destination. Legend tells, too, that because of his holiness, he had power to subdue the evil spirits and pass unscathed with his disciples into Tibet, carrying the teachings of the Lord Buddha with him, and how, when he got there, the Pombo Lama, the teacher of the ancient faith, challenged him to prove that his teachings were true. If indeed you carry the truth with you, said he, then prove it by reaching the greatest height in advance of me. We will set out before dawn to climb the summit of Chomo Lungma, Mount Everest, and he who reaches the summit first shall be acknowledged the greater teacher. Now the Pombo Lama was versed in the arts of black magic. He possessed a magic drum on which he could sit and travel through the air wheresoever he willed. So I wonder again if that, like all of these things, we have to rethink them with our mindset of the stuff that we're unraveling now. And talking about sound and levitation, is it possible that people were riding drums and different things, or instruments that sounded like drums that were also vehicles of travel? Who knows? Padmasambhava accepted the challenge of the Pombo Lamba, who made immediate preparations to go on the journey. In the darkness, he sat himself on his drum and put his mind to reaching the summit. Could be mental travel too, spiritual, psyche travel. The saint Padmasambhava showed no haste but retired to rest. When his disciples saw their master sleeping, they, knowing the Pombo Lama had already started, roused the saint, crying in alarm, "Master, awaken! The Pombo Lama is already halfway up the mountain while you still sleep." Padmasambhava, however, smiled upon their fears and bade them go and leave him to sleep, and to have no fear. Still they begged him to make haste, only to be told once more to leave him in peace. Padmasambhava showed no alarm. He knew within himself that his was the greater teaching. He was versed in white magic, the magic of good over evil, the magic of love and compassion to all men and to all beasts, the great white magic of light to conquer darkness. That's what we all have and need to awaken again. The master slept. Awakening at dawn and going to his window, he sat as one wrapped in meditation, gazing at the cold light stealing over the sky, the herald of the coming day. Then, as the sun rose and the first shaft of sunlight pierced the gloom, he mounted the sun ray and was carried instantly to the summit of Chomo Lungma, there to seat himself on the throne of gold and garnet. The Tibetans say that the throne of Padmasambhava remains on the highest peak of the mountain, and they believed that one of the objects of the Mount Everest expedition was to find this jeweled throne. I wonder if it's already been found and taken, or if people are maybe going to a different mountain. Maybe Mount Everest is even a decoy in our present realm to a different, more holy mountain that exists somewhere among the Himalayas. For them to have charted the whole thing and found everyone, I don't think it's possible. So who knows? I've never been in that area. Again, don't know, but I guarantee there's something magic that was once the Himalayas, whatever it was. There are many stories of miracles performed by this holy saint. To tell of them now would take too much space, for I want to tell you something of how I collected the stories in this book during my stay in Tibet. I wish I could take you with me, were it but for a day, and show you what I have seen, but since I am not versed in magic of any sort, not even that kind of magic that can produce an enchanted carpet or a broomstick, let alone sun rays and magic drums, on which to whisk you over the distant Himalayas, I must ask you to use your imagination and make believe we are journeying together over plains, through forests, up mountain passes, and then into Tibet itself. If this were a book of my travels, I might begin by telling you that Tibet is a great plateau in Central Asia surrounded by the loftiest mountains in the world, and go on to tell you of the wonderful monasteries built into the cliffs, of the communities of Lamist priests and monks who live there, of the libraries in these monasteries where the books are parchment scrolls, all written out and illumined by hand or printed on hand-carved wooden blocks. How they are pigeonholed row on row into the walls, with colorful tassels of knotted silks dangling from the ends of them, so that the wall becomes a veritable cascade of colors, faded and mellowed by time, just as the stories and teachings on the scrolls have become mellowed by time and telling too. Wow, imagine what that was like, and I hope they were preserved, but probably not. But wow, an ancient Tibetan library sounds like a beautiful place. And how I should have liked to stay for years and years, delving in those dim, musty libraries, drawing out the thoughts that were rolled up in these yellowing scrolls, and to spread them before you now. Time would not allow, and so I had to content myself with picking up a story where and when I could, with the help of an interpreter and a little 17-year-old Tibetan girl who was my greatest help. So good was she at mimicry. Once I had gained her love and confidence and her interest, my path became more or less easy. I say more or less because you must remember I was, so to speak, taking a double journey, a journey in a strange land and a journey into the minds of the people. Having been born in an eastern country and having spent my childhood there perhaps made my task easier, for I understand Orientals and feel at home with them. I was able to grasp the imagery and symbolism in a way that might have been impossible for me had I been brought up differently. When I arrived in Tibet, I set about feeling my way. To have baldly asked to be told a story I knew would have been to court polite refusal. I would have been met by a shy laugh, the assurance that I was jesting, or that no one knew a story worth the telling. So I made up a story to get a story. "You can see," I said, "that my boxes are small. It is difficult to get pack mules. I have to sit on my boxes as it is to get them to close. How can I bring gifts to my friends when I have no room to pack them? I would like to bring something from Tibet for my friends, more especially for the children of my friends, but as I have no room to pack anything in my trunks, I must pack in my head. So if you will be kind enough to help me get stories, I will pack them in my head and carry them home." I got my first story, and the nature of it showed that I stood on a fertile field. Then I got another and another, until not only my mind, but my manuscript was tightly filled. Odd as it may seem, I found it easier to get a story through my little Tibetan girl alone than with the aid of an interpreter. What a strange quest it was, going from door to door like two mendicants begging, not for bread, but just for a simple story. My own journeyings were often as long as any in a fairy tale, and many were the people we visited, from the great oracle Lama chief magician of Tibet, down to a little old wise woman who was reputed to be a witch. When first I visited her hovel and saw her crouched by the embers of her fire, her matted hair falling round her face, I begged my companion to leave the storytelling for that day, but she insisted the old lady could tell many a story, and so she could. How could I have guessed, though, when I stepped from her filthy yard into a room where cobwebs of years, blackened by soot, hung fully 2 feet down from the rafters, that the occupant of the room, the little old woman whose skin was glazed and as blue as a mountain bilberry, could unfold tale upon tale as she did. I can see her now as I write, crouched in her corner by the dying fire, the festoons of black cobwebs hanging like untidy funeral plumes over her matted head. I can hear the crooning voice telling a story. Yes, the fairy folk were her visitors. Her body was sick, but her spirit, her spirit roamed fancy-free. She could sink back out of her surroundings as one might sink backwards into the sweet waters of a fairy well, to step out at the bottom through a secret door into the moonlight hills of fairydom. The chief magician was all a chief musician should be, tall and imposing, with dark piercing eyes that seemed like gimlets boring into the depths of my own mind to see what I kept hidden there. As befits the king of magicians, he sat on a gilded throne. He wore a great headdress made entirely of peacock feathers, craftily laid one on top of the other and spread out like a great fan. By the winking lights of the tiny tapers that burned beside him, the eyes in the feathers looked wide and staring, a double halo of eyes around his magic head. There were shepherds, too, who could tell their own tales of frolicsome goats and sheep, and Lamas priests who took care to make the moral of each story clear to me, and the mothers of Tibet who knead butter into their babies and tell a tale while doing it, the driver of yaks and the cultured people of the upper classes, all kindly folk who by their friendliness enriched my store of fairy lore. We have only time to glance at them now. The shepherd from his yak hair tent, leading his sheep to graze in the valleys when winter sets in, will tell you stories of the hairy men who live up in the desolate mountains and who steal down at night to carry off oxen and sheep. Bigfoot? Sasquatch? Dread monsters called Sokpars. Sokpars. He will tell you how these Sokpars seize men, women, and children, killing them after biting off the tips of their fingers and toes and the lobes of their ears. Then there is the peasant girl who has smeared her face with kuch, rendering it ugly, because once upon a time, long, long ago, the poet-priest ruling Lama of Tibet, himself a god on earth, fell in love with a humble maiden. There is a dancing girl at an inn, and the Tibetan lady of high degree in silk and brocaded gown with seed pearls threaded into her plaited hair, and an aureole of turquoise and coral framing her dainty head, and the Lama's priest in long robes of saffron or maroon cloth twirling a prayer wheel in one hand and holding a rosary of large beads in the other. To such people as these, I had to go to ask to be told a story. Notebook in hand, I would sit on the ground with my little Tibetan maid beside me and watch the face of the one who was telling the story. Watch every shade of expression that filtered over his features. Tell me why he laughs and is amused there. Why does he look sad here? Why does he speak seriously now? What prompted that action? What prompted that thought? And so on. I would make careful notes. Then home again, and we would go through the story, this time in mime. the story roughly sketched out, I would go to some other, perhaps more learned person and ask to be told the story again to get the detail and feeling, until little by little I had traced in each individual thread and seen the story as a whole. Awesome. Awesome idea. This lady rules. I found many stories in Tibet resembling our own old favorites: Cinderella, Red Riding Hood, Jack of Beanstalk fame. These are too well known to tell again, even in their novel setting. The Tibetan, that's interesting as well. Did they all originate in Tibetan Tartarian, a lot of those stories? Are we still Tartarian and Tibetan descendants now, but just taught differently and explained a different reality and a different history that has been robbed from us? What is the truth? I wonder. And I think in stories you can tell something. There's hints. But here we go. It continues. The last paragraph. The Tibetans are a laughter-loving people. They refer often with amusement to the weaknesses and frailties of human nature. They are particularly fond of telling stories of the well-intentioned fool. Stories are told both to amuse and to instruct. Take the story of Dorji and Tipsy, for instance. Dorji, the thoughtless, pleasure-loving boy, destined to become the ruler of a people. Step by step through the narrative, we see how he is made to feel with every living creature before he is worthy to come into his kingdom. Wow. Imagine if kings needed that now. Then there is Mother Goat. Are we not acquainted with her prototype in the human family? And the absurd gentleman who, not content to ride a horse or mule as other folk do, bought himself an elephant to ride. I have endeavored to show you the twists of sly humor that so delight the Tibetan mind, so you may enter into the thoughts of a little-known but nonetheless cultured people. Now I would ask you to lay your cares aside as you turn this page and step with me through the portals of mystic Tibet to the land of once on a time. So again, there's so much to think here, and just, thankful to this lady who did this and who had the desire to do this, and her method, again, is something that we must do. I think we all should be going to our elders that are still around today and asking them for all the stories, all the things they thought. Did you ever question this? Did you ever question that? What did you think? What happened? How did we get here? How did you grow up? And look at just anything, and anything you remember that needs to be passed on. And we should preserve that stuff, because once it's gone, it's gone. It doesn't matter what if someone had the best story of all time and we didn't get it. It does matter, but it doesn't, anyone can pass away that might have a massive piece of our puzzle, our human puzzle. And so it's great to just get in the habit of trying to recollect and restore those things. And this lady did a great job. So I encourage everyone to read the book. And again, keep in mind certain things. Tibet is one of the most prosecuted nations of our recent time. There's been a lot in Middle East. There's things all over the place. But what happened, what China and the communists did to the Tibetan people is one of the most despicable things, considering the ancient treasures that they just completely ravaged and desecrated, and just how, this is an ancient community, I think, connected to Tartaria, and one of the last strongholds of spiritual Tartaria. And I think it was nestled in the middle of the Himalayas for a particular reason, to keep it preserved. And God knows what it was surrounded by at one point. I do believe that the architects crafted this world at a very distant past, and who knows what the Himalayas were. I don't think they were just chaotic rocks and mountains. I think they were once something absolutely beautiful, perfect, and intentional. And so I factor all of these things in when I think about these, and I think we all should when we read any of these stories, because the symbolism of ancient tales is meant to be symbolic, and you never know when they had to hide things throughout time. Like hide this bird, maybe could have been a plane at one point, and then just through time it had to be hidden, because hey, if this guy's talking about a plane, get him or arrest him for heresy or anything. This guy is crazy. He's talking about something, anything. You really don't know what happens throughout time. But stories do get preserved, and the symbolism and the power behind them and the feeling behind them and the intention, the message, and the moral are always pretty much eternal. And so everybody, I encourage you to dig through your family, find some beautiful things, find some ancient stories, find some stories about your family that need to be preserved, that are en route to maybe being lost forever, and make sure they don't. and just record them. Get a sound recorder. Do anything to preserve it. It's very encouraging, this lady, and I can't wait to read a little more and maybe do another video on this and the magic bird of Chomolung. Maybe I'll read it and get some highlights and put something together. We'll see. But either way, if you have any thoughts on Everest, Tibet, the magic bird of Chomolung Ma, or you know any other insight, definitely insert it in the comments below. I love hearing from you all, and together we can piece all of this together and make sense of this massive puzzle that we are surrounded by, this enigma of the most epic proportions fathomable. So there's no telling what's going to happen, but Tibetans, Tartarians, a lot for us to learn. So keep it going out there, and bless you all.